The War Museum in Bloemfontein is the oldest South African museum dedicated to a single historical event. The museum was established in 1931 by the Afrikaner community to collect, preserve and display items related to the South African War of 1899 to 1902. The museum is also the only official museum in the world devoted entirely to preserving the history of this war and commemorating those who fought, suffered and lost their lives in the conflict. Ownership of the museum was transferred to the state in 1934. Today, the museum falls under the National Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. Until the late 1980s, historical writings and research on the South African War at both a national and international level gave almost no acknowledgement to the involvement of black South Africans in the hostilities. This was initially also the case at the War Museum, a tendency that contradicted the historical realities of the war.
The War of 1899 to 1902 was the most devastating conventional military conflict ever fought on South African soil. The hostilities had a profound effect on the post-war relationship between many Afrikaners and members of black communities in South Africa. During the war, about 100,000 black South Africans took up employment with the British Army. This involvement was not only motivated by securing much-needed income to survive, but also the futile hope of attaining improved political rights after the war. Moreover, at least 30,000 black men were armed by the British military during the guerrilla phase of the conflict to actively support the imperial war effort. In nationalist Afrikaner circles, this support to the British by black people was interpreted as siding with the enemy, causing intensified discrimination, political oppression, and land dispossession.
Following South Africa's democratic transition in 1994, the War Museum found itself in a precarious situation. Some role players in the new political landscape regarded it as an apartheid-era museum because it had often been used in the past to promote the ideals of Afrikaner nationalism. Against this background, Toki Pretorius was appointed as the 5th Director and Chief Executive Officer of the museum in 2009. Together with his management team and staff, and with the support of several museum councils through the years, the new director took on the challenging task of strategically repositioning the museum for a democratic South Africa.
Some people within the Afrikaner community accuse me of being a sellout. At the same time, others on the opposite side of the political spectrum were of the view that there was no place for the museum in a democratic South Africa. But I firmly believe that the story of the South African War belongs to all South Africans. This meant that in addition to the experience of Afrikaners, we also had to take into account the involvement and suffering of black, brown and Indian South Africans. Our goal was to transform the museum into a place for nation building, social cohesion and nation healing.
In promoting an inclusive and reconciliatory narrative of the conflict, the War Museum today propagates a contemporary and universal message of denouncing war and human suffering as a consequence thereof. Since 2009, the strategic repositioning of the War Museum coincided with remarkable growth through the continuous expansion of its facilities and exhibitions. This progress has been made possible through the innovative leadership of the director, who secured not only funding from the Department of Sport, Arts and Culture, but also sponsorships and donations from organizations across South Africa and abroad. Some transformation projects and initiatives implemented since 2009 will now be highlighted. The museum building was extended to accommodate the modern Sol Plaatjie Hall to commemorate the suffering and loss experienced by black South Africans during the war. The contribution of approximately 12,000 black agterryers, or farm workers who performed supportive duties as part of Boer commandos, is recognized through a dedicated statue. In addition, the War Museum published several groundbreaking books on black involvement in the South African War, while also educating audiences nationally and internationally on the topic by means of well-researched video documentaries on the museum's YouTube channel. A garden of remembrance reflects the documented names of about 36,000 white and black women and children who died in concentration and labour camps during the war. A memorial has also been erected to the Boer women and children confined in the Betuli concentration camp, a camp described by some as a camp from hell. An authentic scale model based on archaeological excavations at the camp for black civilians at Dryharts near Kimberley can also be viewed inside the museum. The experiences of young victims are remembered through a children's labyrinth, which tells the story of both white and black children caught up in the conflict. The role of a courageous British philanthropist, Emily Hobhouse, in exposing the dreadful conditions within many British concentration camps is revealed in a new and dedicated exhibition hall. Moreover, the museum also transcends the historical suffering of the South African War by raising awareness about the unacceptably high levels of violence against women and children experienced in present-day South Africa. Apart from actively participating in the annual campaign of 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children, the museum also hosts large-scale national and international events in this regard. For example, a hybrid international conference on gender-based violence was presented in the recent past. In an effort not to minimize or neglect the suffering of Afrikaners in the war, the museum erected a wall of remembrance recording the names of 4,350 members of the Boer forces who lost their lives. The neglected museum building at the Paardeberg battlefield was relocated to the museum grounds and fitted with a new exhibition on one of the war's most significant battles. The Louis Botha Hall inside the museum building portrays the daily lives of Boer forces on commando. The museum acquired a statue of President N.T. Steyn of the former Orange Free State Republic from the University of the Free State. The statue was re-erected on the grounds of the museum, adding another appropriate landmark to this heritage site. The War Museum aspires to promote international reconciliation between former adversaries in the war. A British garrison hospital used during the war has been carefully reconstructed on the museum grounds to illustrate the medical care available at the time. In collaboration with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, the museum likewise established a symbolic British cemetery using authentic memorials and grave markers from the war. It commemorates the approximately 22,000 British soldiers who died during the conflict. Another historic structure, once used as the headquarters of General Leslie Rundle in Harry Smith, has also been relocated to the museum. Today, Rundle House exhibits, among others, a typical war room used to plan military strategies, as well as the general's private quarters. An exhibit of a British military train used during the war has been upgraded. The construction of an authentic replica of the British blockhouse at Tierpoort outside Bloemfontein allows the museum to demonstrate the vital role that these defensive structures played during the war. The Lord Roberts Hall inside the museum building explores the role of British soldiers during the war. Staff from the museum's educational department regularly visit schools to introduce learners to the history of the South African War. Guided tours of the museum's indoor and outdoor exhibitions are offered for school groups throughout the year. To encourage the interest of younger audiences, the museum launched a children's book series in Afrikaans, English and Sesotho, introducing the history of the war through stories written especially for young readers. Moreover, the museum is producing a 4-part educational video series that will provide teachers across South Africa with a valuable classroom resource on the South African War. Educational outreach further includes an annual quiz competition that encourages learners to deepen their knowledge of the conflict. Beyond education, the museum continues to play an active role in the community. Each year, it hosts commemorative events that attract large public audiences and encourage awareness of the war. Family events such as a night at the museum attract new visitors to the museum, thereby creating opportunities for further engagement. The museum also supports the artistic interpretation of the past. One example was the development and presentation of a professional stage production portraying the experiences and suffering of women during the war. Additionally, with experienced staff and modern facilities at its disposal, the museum aspires to be a living museum by increasingly hosting large provincial and national events. For example, the Free State Uncovered Expo, presented in partnership with the tourism sector and the commemoration of Afrikaans as an official language of South Africa, hosted together with the National Department of Sport, Arts and Culture. The museum continuously initiates and receives visits from ambassadors, high commissioners and diplomatic representatives from various countries that have historical ties to the South African War. Among these visitors have been Russian ambassadors and diplomatic staff who participated in commemorative events honoring Russian volunteers who served during the war, while also donating historically significant heritage items to the museum. Furthermore, the High Commissioner of India attended the launch of the museum's new publication on Indian involvement in the South African War. The Ambassador of the Netherlands officially opened an exhibition on Dutch involvement in the war. These initiatives have strengthened the museum's international profile, while also reinforcing the international relevance and significance of the South African War and this heritage institution. Behind the museum's development and growth lies a strong commitment to effective management and financial accountability. Since 2009, the museum has received several prestigious awards from the Office of the Auditor General of South Africa, based on its continuous and excellent performance during various audit cycles.
During the past 16 consecutive years, the War Museum incurred no fruitless, wasteful, and/or irregular expenditure. The museum met all its performance targets for the past 8 consecutive years. Building on this foundation, the museum also recently secured its 4th consecutive clean audit, where no material misstatements or material findings in compliance and predetermined objectives were identified. Achieving and maintaining this standard over 4 consecutive audit cycles sets a commendable example of good governance and accountability within the public sector. It likewise demonstrates the value of strong leadership, proving that an effective internal control environment and a culture of continuous excellence prevail in this public entity.
The War Museum has successfully transformed itself into an inclusive heritage institution and living museum that tells the story of the South African War from the perspectives of all those who experienced it. At the same time, sustained development and growth have also established the reputation of the museum as one of South Africa's leading heritage institutions and one of the foremost museums of its kind in the world. But ultimately, a museum is about its visitors. In a recent survey conducted among provincial and national visitors by an independent research company, 95% of respondents agreed that the War Museum is one of the best museums they have visited in South Africa, while 97% indicated that visiting this heritage institution is a worthwhile experience. The independent survey report concludes that the overwhelmingly positive findings of the survey indicate the War Museum has earned a very special place in the hearts and minds of its visitors.
I want to sincerely thank the National Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, the museum councils that served through the years, our sponsors and donors, and above all my dedicated staff. Despite a limited budget and a team of only 26 employees, the museum has continued to grow and develop. This shows the passion and professionalism of everyone working here. Together, we have built an heritage institution of which all South Africans can be proud.